Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are continuing our ambitious journey through John Maynard Keynes' two-volume magnum opus, a treatise on money.
And it is definitely a journey.
It is. If the first part of Volume 1 was all about laying the conceptual foundation, getting the definitions just right, today we get into what Keynes himself called a necessary, but maybe even a foolish digression.
Book 2, The Theory of Index Numbers.
Exactly. It feels like a detour, but it's one you absolutely have to take.
It's a critical detour, though. You have to remember the sheer scale of what he was trying to do here. This book comes out in 1930, and it's the result of 6 years of just intense work, arguing back and forth with guys like D.H. Robertson and R.G. Hawtrey.
It's the biggest names of the day.
Right. And his mission for the whole treatise is just massive. He wants to figure out the causes and consequences of changes in the value of money and, the really big goal, find a way to control those changes.
For economic stability, for actual well-being.
Precisely. And that brings us right here.
Because before you can analyze the changes in the value of money, you first have to figure out how to measure that value. And that, it turns out, is the real trick, isn't it?
That's the whole ball game. If you're aiming for price stability, you have to agree on which price you're stabilizing.
Okay, so Book 2 is like the acid test for all the theory. It forces you to get your hands dirty with the data and confront the fact that measuring the purchasing power of money is way more complicated than just, averaging the price of groceries.
Far more. It's a conceptual minefield.
All right, let's unpack this. But maybe we should do a super quick recap of the groundwork from Book 1, because the tools he defined there are exactly what we're trying to measure now.
Good idea. So there were 3 key frameworks we set up. The first one was that crucial distinction between the money of account and money proper.
Right. The money of account is the abstract title, the description.
Yeah.
Like the King of England.
And money proper is the actual thing that answers to that description. The physical coin, the banknote, King Charles III.
And that matters so much because the state can start managing the currency, so the thing itself, money proper, can change while the title stays the same.
Exactly. It's how you get continuity when currency systems shift. Then the second framework was his classification of money. We moved beyond simple commodity money like gold or pure fiat money
to the modern system, the one we all live under now, managed money.
The hybrid, yes. It's a representative currency, but the state manages its issue, not necessarily to keep it pegged to gold, but to maintain its value against some other standard, usually price stability.
And this was hyper-relevant in 1930. The British had just gone back onto a form of the gold standard, but it was a managed system.
A pure managed money, by law. So the whole question of how you manage it became the central policy challenge, which is why Keynes had to tackle the theory.
Okay, and the third framework was the breakdown of current money, all the money held by the public, based on what people intend to do with it.
Right. This is where he gets really granular. He classifies the money stock by its use.
Yeah.
So you have income money.
Money you and I hold to pay our bills between paychecks.
Then business money, which is what firms use for their day-to-day transactions. And then, crucially, savings money.
Money held as a store of value, what we'd call time deposits or a savings account.
And that's where you see the first big measurement problem pop up.
Yeah, explain that because it's a really subtle but important point.
Well, it's a source of constant statistical confusion. Keynes points out that the total published bank deposits, the number everyone looks at, includes all that savings money.
Which, for transaction purposes, is barely money at all. It's just sitting there.
It's sitting there. But at the same time, the official figures exclude things like unused overdraft facilities, which are, for all intents and purposes, cash you can spend immediately.
So a central bank could look at the total money supply, M2 or M3 or whatever, see deposits rising and think, great, there's more money available for spending.
Right. They might assume transactional velocity is going up, but if that increase is just people getting scared and moving their money from checking accounts into savings accounts, into savings money.
The bear position, as he calls it.
Exactly. Then that rise in total deposits is deeply misleading. It suggests liquidity is increasing, when in fact the money available for actual transactions is shrinking. It totally distorts the velocity numbers.
So right off the bat, even just measuring the quantity of money is full of traps.
Full of them.
Okay, so with those tools in mind, we're now ready for Book 2, The Theory of Index Numbers. You said Keynes almost apologized for this detour?
He did, but it was absolutely necessary. He starts Book 2 by just stating bluntly that a truly satisfactory index of purchasing power is, quote, missing.
They just didn't have one.
No, and the statistical revolution after World War I, which gave them a ton more price data, just made the problem worse, in a way.
How so?
Because it revealed these huge divergences between different price standards. Wholesale prices were doing one thing, retail prices another, wages another. It completely destroyed that old 19th century idea that you could just use a single number, usually the wholesale index, to represent the value of money.
So the core argument of Book 2 is that there is no single universal index. You have to use a whole toolkit, a plurality of price levels.
That's it, exactly. It's like a doctor trying to assess a patient's health. You can't just take their temperature. You need their blood pressure, their heart rate, their cholesterol.
All the numbers tell different but equally important stories.
And their failure to move together is what tells you what's really going on in the economy.
Okay, so let's start with the ideal standard. The one that, in a perfect world, would tell us what really matters to the average person.
For Keynes, that is the consumption standard. He calls it the measure of purchasing power par excellence, or ppm.
And what does that mean in simple terms?
It measures the power of money to buy the composite of goods and services on which a community spends its money income. It's the cost of living. That's really what it is.
And this is where he launches his big attack on the traditional approach, right? The 19th century habit of just using the wholesale index as a stand-in for the value of money. Why was that so common?
Honestly, it was just a matter of data availability and intellectual inertia. Guys like Jevons, Sauerbeck, the people at The Economist, they all used wholesale data because it was the only data they had in long, consistent series.
It was easy to get.
It was the easiest thing to gather and track, so everyone just sort of accepted it, without much qualification, even though they knew it wasn't perfect.
But historical convenience isn't the same as being right. Why is the wholesale index so fundamentally wrong as a proxy for the cost of living?
Because the consumption index is supposed to measure the expenditure of our total income. The wholesale index just tracks basic commodities, raw materials, stuff at the very beginning of the production chain. It omits 3 huge parts of modern spending.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, personal services. As economies get richer, we spend way more of our income on things that aren't commodities. Education, healthcare, entertainment, transport.
Your haircut.
Your haircut. Wholesale prices tell you nothing about that. Second, it misses the entire layer of marketing and distribution costs, the retail markup,
The cost of getting the thing from the factory to your hand.
which is massive, and it often moves completely independently of the raw material costs. And third, and this is a big one, consumption derived from fixed capital. His main example is house room, or rent.
Rent. I mean, that's a huge chunk of most people's income, and the wholesale index just ignores it completely.
Completely ignores it. So this isn't a small omission, it's a systemic blindness.
So what was the practical cost of this blindness? If
Yeah.
policymakers in the 1920s were looking at the wholesale index, what were they getting wrong?
They were constantly misjudging inflation and deflation, especially during business cycles. Think about it. During a boom, raw material prices, wholesale prices, they can spike like crazy because of speculation and inventory building.
Right.
But if that doesn't immediately translate into sharp increases in rents or the cost of services, which are often sticky and lag behind, the consumption index, what people actually feel, doesn't rise nearly as fast.
And the reverse is true in a bust, I assume.
Even more so. The wholesale index is famous for fluctuating far more violently. Raw material prices can collapse overnight. The cost of living doesn't.
So policymakers would look at the wholesale numbers and think the boom was way more inflationary or the bust was way more deflationary than what the average person was actually experiencing.
Exactly. They'd overreact, or they'd underestimate the real changes in purchasing power. The wholesale standard is a useful indicator for one thing: the price level of working capital, the cost of goods in process for businesses. But for the cost of living, it's just chronically inadequate.
So without a perfect official consumption index in 1930, what did Keynes have to work with?
He had to use these complex approximations. He talks about things like the Snyder Index in the US, which tried to kind of stitch together a bunch of different numbers: wholesale prices, wages, cost of living, rent, to get a composite average that was closer to the truth. It just highlights how messy the statistical reality was.
Okay, so if the consumption standard measures what money buys, Keynes also introduces another fundamental standard that measures what money commands.
Yes, the labor power of money, or the earnings standard. This one measures the power of money over units of human effort. It's a totally different concept from power over units of commodities.
And the relationship between these two, what money buys versus what it commands, that's critical, isn't it?
It is the absolute basis for understanding the standard of living. The ratio is everything. You take the purchasing power of money, the consumption standard, and you divide it by the labor power of money. The result is an index of real earning power.
Your standard of life.
Your standard of life. If my wage stays the same but prices fall by half, my standard of life has doubled for the same amount of effort.
But measuring effort seems almost impossible. How do you find a common unit of effort for a coal miner, a bank clerk, and a surgeon?
That is the chief obstacle. He admits it's almost insurmountable. Ideally, you'd want an index that could account for things like the intensity of the work, the distastefulness of it, the regularity.
All these subjective things.
Highly subjective. In practice, he says the best you can do is just an average of hourly money earnings across all different grades of workers. You're trying to isolate the rate of pay per unit of standardized effort.
And this isn't just a technical measurement problem. It leads straight into a massive policy question, one that's still with us today. The stabilization dilemma.
The profound long-term choice. For any economy that's getting more efficient and productive, what should you stabilize? The purchasing power of money, the price of the consumption basket, or the labor power of money, the earnings standard.
Okay, let's walk through an example of what that choice actually means.
All right, let's say technology doubles the overall efficiency of the economy, but the amount of human effort stays the same.
Okay.
Case one. You decide to stabilize the labor power of money. That means you fix nominal wages. The average paycheck doesn't change.
So if efficiency doubles, the cost of producing things must be cut in half.
Right, and so prices have to fall by half. Your money suddenly buys twice as much. Your standard of life improves through falling prices.
That sounds like a progressive disinflation.
It is. Now, case two, you decide to stabilize the purchasing power of money. You aim for a stable price level, maybe 2% inflation, whatever.
So the cost of the consumption basket stays the same.
Exactly. If efficiency doubles and prices are stable, then the entire benefit of that new efficiency has to be passed on through higher money earnings. Nominal wages have to double. Your standard of life improves through a bigger paycheck.
So stabilizing the labor standard gives you falling prices, which can feel deflationary and is terrible for anyone with debt. Stabilizing purchasing power gives you stable prices, but means nominal wages have to constantly rise.
You've got it. And the choice is complicated by reality. Keynes noted that if wages are naturally sticky, which they often are, then trying to force prices down, like in case one, can be really disruptive. But on the other hand, if unions are strong and wages have a natural tendency to rise anyway, trying to keep prices stable can lead to a huge squeeze on profits and instability.
So you can't have both wage stability and price stability when productivity is changing. You have to choose.
You have to choose. And that choice is fundamentally a political and distributional question, not just a technical one.
That's a brilliant insight. The measurement itself determines the policy, and the policy determines who gets the benefits of progress.
That's Keynes.
Okay, so we've got the two big ones, consumption and labor. But Book 2 is all about plurality. After World War I, it became obvious these other standards were out there and not moving in sync.
Absolutely. So we have to look at the secondary standards that are useful for specific kinds of analysis.
We already talked about the Wholesale Standard. After tearing it down as a measure of PPM, how does he justify keeping it around?
He justifies it because of its connection to investment. It's a terrible measure of consumption. But the prices it tracks, raw materials, basic commodities, they correspond pretty well to the price level of working capital.
The cost of the stuff businesses need to make other stuff.
Exactly. And because it's so sensitive to credit and speculation, its volatility is a really important early warning signal for business investment and inventory cycles.
And then there's the International Standard, which is all about the link to the global economy.
Right. This one's crucial for understanding external balance, especially in the 1920s and 30s. This standard is made up of all the big standardized commodities that flow easily across borders. Keynes called it the unsheltered price level because it's totally exposed to international competition.
And how does the movement of this unsheltered price level force countries to adjust?
Well, under a gold standard with fixed exchange rates, you need your foreign lending, let's call it L, to equal your foreign balance, B, basically your exports minus your imports.
So you can't be sending more money abroad than you're earning from trade.
In the long run, no. And that foreign balance, B, depends heavily on your relative price levels at home versus abroad. If you're unsheltered prices go up, your exports get expensive, imports get cheap, and your B falls.
You have a disequilibrium. L is greater than B.
And under a gold standard, that forces gold to flow out of the country. And that gold movement is the painful mechanism that forces you to adjust your domestic prices and incomes back down to restore balance. It shows the limits of domestic policy when you're tied to a rigid global system.
Which explains all the violent and disruptive gold movements of the 1920s. They were the system trying to force diverging price levels back into alignment.
You've nailed it.
Okay, now we get to the really abstract ones, the ones that connect all this measurement stuff back to the quantity theory of money, the currency standards.
This is where Keynes gets really clever. He's basically saying that the famous quantity theory equations that came before him, Irving Fisher's on one side, the Cambridge School on the other, they were technically talking about price levels, but not the consumption price level.
They were talking about their own very specific price levels.
Exactly. Price levels weighted not by what consumers buy, but by what money does. And that gives you two very different standards, which he calls P211 and P22.
Let's start with P211, the one related to the total flow of money.
That's the cash transaction standard, or P2. This one weights things based on the total volume of cash transactions they generate. So this is the P in Irving Fisher's famous equation, OT by T, TS, M by V, V.
Price level times transactions equals money times velocity. So P2 is the price of total economic activity, the sheer volume of it. What gets heavily weighted here?
Things with insane transactional turnover. Things that are often totally irrelevant to the average person's life. Think about stock exchange business where the same share can be bought and sold dozens of times a day. Or short-term treasury bills. These things generate a massive volume of cash transactions.
So P2 could be going through the roof because of a stock market bubble, even if the price of bread is perfectly stable.
Perfectly stable. It's a measure of mechanical frequent turnover.
Okay, so how is that different from P dollars, the cash balances standard? That one's about holding money, not spending it.
Right. The cash balances standard, P$1, is the P you get from the Cambridge version of the quantity theory, where $1 equals KPRR. The standard weights things based on the demand for cash balances you need to hold in order to carry out the transaction.
So it's not about the flow, but about the reservoir of money you need.
Exactly. It's about the stock, not the flow.
That's a subtle distinction. If two transactions are for the same amount of money, why would one require a bigger cash balance than the other?
Because of uncertainty. P$1 is just turnover. P$1 is about the need for a buffer. If a business has perfectly regular, predictable weekly expenses, the transaction volume might be high, but they can keep their idle cash balances really low.
Okay.
But for a complex, unpredictable payment, say a giant construction project with irregular payment schedules, you need to hold a much bigger pile of anticipatory cash just in case. The transaction frequency might be low, but the demand for balances to support it is high.
I think I get it. TP2 is like a high-frequency trading algorithm all about speed and flow. PT21 is more like a big company's contingency fund, a reserve for big, lumpy, uncertain payments.
That's a great way to put it. And both of them are completely different from the consumption standard, which is the only one that tells us about our actual standard of life.
And the failure of all these different standards to move together, the financial markets booming while consumer prices are flat, that's the whole puzzle of short-term economics.
That is the whole puzzle.
And this detailed mapping of all these different price levels. This leads us to one of the most powerful philosophical attacks in the whole book. Keynes' total rejection of what he calls the Jevonian mirage.
This is a devastating critique. It's often overlooked, but it's an attack on the very foundations of 19th century statistical thinking about money.
So what was the mirage? What did people like Jevons believe?
They genuinely believed that if you just collected enough different price data points, you could statistically find an underlying, universal, objective mean variation of general prices, a kind of neutral bullseye that would show you the pure effect of money itself on everything.
And the logic for that came from probability theory, right? The law of error.
Exactly. The theory was that any price change is made of two parts. There's the change caused by money, the bullseye that affects all prices equally, and then there are all the random non-monetary changes, like a drought hitting the price of wheat.
And they assumed all those random changes were independent of each other?
Yes, and according to the law of error, if you average enough independent random events, they'll all just cancel each other out.
So if a drought makes wheat more expensive, but a bumper crop makes cotton cheaper, those two things wash out in the average, and all you're left with is the pure effect of the central bank printing money.
That was the dream. And Keynes just calls it a confusion of thought, a mirage. The entire fallacy is in that one word: independence.
Price changes in an economy are not independent.
Never. He introduces this idea of connexity, or subnormal dispersion. He argues that every major change in purchasing power, especially one that comes from the banking system, doesn't happen in a vacuum. It forces compensatory changes all through the system.
Give me that factory construction example again.
Okay, so a bank creates new credit to fund a boom in factory construction. That new money immediately floods into the capital goods market, right? The price of steel, construction labor, it all goes up.
Sure.
But that purchasing power being spent on factories is purchasing power that is now not being spent on, say, consumer goods. So while the price of capital goods is rising, there's a corresponding downward pressure on the price of consumption goods. They're not independent events. They are connected by that initial act of credit creation.
The economic system is just too interconnected for that kind of simple statistical averaging to work.
Precisely. Because of this connexity, you can't just average a bunch of prices and hope to find some neutral monetary bullseye. It doesn't exist. Therefore, any valid price index has to be the price of a composite weighted commodity, and the weighting has to explicitly reflect the purpose of your measurement.
So the purpose defines the measure. There is no true measure.
There is no true measure.
And the real-world stakes of this are huge. He says the old habit of treating all price levels as if they move together was particularly unfortunate for understanding the economy.
Because it made them blind to what was really going on. If the price of working capital, the wholesale index, is going crazy, but the cost of living seems stable, a central bank looking at the wrong number might think everything's fine.
When in reality, huge stresses are building up inside the system.
Exactly. For Keynes, the failure of these different price levels to move together, capital goods versus consumer goods, consumption prices versus financial prices, that failure is the essence of the business cycle. The divergence is the problem we need to study.
If all prices moved up and down together, macroeconomics would be easy.
It would be trivial. The fact that they don't is what creates boom and bust.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this. Book 2 has shown us that to understand the value of money, we have to accept this plurality of standards. We've got the big ones, the consumption standard and the labor standard, which reflect human life.
And then all these crucial secondary diagnostic standards, the wholesale, the international, and the theoretical currency standards. And understanding the gaps between them is the foundation for everything that comes next.
On a really practical level, all this talk about index numbers raises a huge real-world problem. How do you compare purchasing power when our habits change so much?
Right.
How do you compare the cost of living in New York versus London today, let alone, London in 1920 versus today?
It's a massive challenge for statisticians because the composite commodity you're measuring is a moving target. Our tastes change, technology changes. We consume a completely different basket of goods than people did a century ago. Keynes looked at two main ways people try to solve this.
The first one being the direct method.
The direct method is basically just common sense. It's what you do when you get a job offer in another city and you ask a friend who lives there, hey, what kind of salary would I need to live the way I do now?
You're just comparing the incomes of two people you judge to be similar in their well-being?
Exactly. It's practical, but it's not very scientific. There's no objective test for similar. Keynes gave an example like, judging that an income of £1,200 in New York is maybe equivalent to $700 in London or $500 in Edinburgh for a middle-class professional. It's just a gut feeling.
Which leads to the more rigorous but maybe impossible indirect method.
The indirect method is the statistical approach. You try to compare the prices of equivalent composite commodities. You build two representative shopping baskets, one for London and one for New York, and try to price them out.
But the baskets themselves are different. People in New York buy things, people in London don't, and vice versa.
And that's where it gets monumentally complicated. You have to use all this complex mathematical weighting to try to find a fair comparison. It's a statistician's nightmare.
So the big takeaway from Book 2 is that as soon as you look closely, that simple idea of a single value of money just shatters. It dissolves into this dynamic, shifting set of relative values.
And those relative values are where all the economic action is.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought to leave you with. It connects this whole measurement problem to real-world policy impact. You're saying the source material really emphasizes that a change in the quantity of money is almost never neutral.
It's never spread evenly. When new purchasing power enters the economy, it's not a scalar, it's a vector. It has a direction.
It's not like a gentle rain falling everywhere equally.
It's like a fire hose aimed at one specific spot. Think about how new money is created. It's concentrated in the hands of the government when it borrows and spends, or in the hands of the first people to get loans during a credit boom, like real estate developers.
And that initial concentration has to immediately raise the prices of the specific things those first borrowers want to buy: construction materials, land, labor.
Absolutely. And here's the crucial insight. This new distribution of purchasing power causes a lasting effect on relative price levels, even if the central bank later stabilizes the total money supply. The fundamental structure of the economy has been altered.
So if a huge credit boom is channeled into housing, the relative price of housing and construction is now permanently higher compared to, say, education or clothing, even after the boom is over.
The money is non-neutral. It doesn't just scale all prices up or down. It fundamentally changes who gets to command resources first, and the new equilibrium will always be different from the old one.
That is a powerful idea to think about. When a government or a central bank creates money, they aren't just changing the numbers on price tags. They are actively redistributing wealth and reshaping the entire economy, depending on where that money first hits.
And it connects right back to the relationship between saving and investment. The act of saving by one person is no guarantee that someone else will use that saving to invest in new capital goods. That dynamic link between saving and investment is what we still need to understand.
Which means we are perfectly set up to finally jump into the heart of the matter. We've done the definitions. We've done the measurement headache. Next time, we move into the kernel of Volume 1, Book 3, The Pure Theory of Money.
We finally get to introduce the fundamental equations. This is the mathematical structure that finally links the three things we've been talking around: the cost of production, saving, and investment, to the actual determination of the price level.
We will finally see the formal mechanism that explains income inflation and profit inflation. The difference between prices rising because wages are rising versus prices rising because entrepreneurs are making windfall profits. It's the dynamic theory he spent 6 years building.
Don't miss it. That is the true beginning of the treatise's revolutionary argument.
We'll see you next time for the deep dive into the fundamental equations.